I'm going to keep to the watercolour theme this week, and this week I just thought I'd talk about lots of little bits rather than do a single demo. I thought we could look at things like textures and just anything else that. So if there's anything you want to add in, I can do that. I'm thinking next week maybe a little bit of line and wash, and then I'll do something on colour. Also, I want to do something on sketchbooks, so I'll try and fit it all in. If you do something on sketchbooks, it'll be next week or the week after, and that'd be a nice opportunity. If you're somebody that keeps sketchbooks, which I know quite a few of you do, it'd be nice to just bring your sketchbooks in. We'll replicate each other's sketchbooks. I'll bring some of mine in and just talk about what we're doing, what we'd like to do. So that's either next week or the week after. So I'm thinking, so last week I started a little bit of a list of different things that I could cover. I'm not sure I'm going to get them all covered. Perhaps do about 10 minutes. And then I've just put a few things down that people are struggling with. So one thing was opening tubes and watercolours that you find that they, like this one here, I can't actually get it open. And what I shared this with some of you, the colour's nice and soft in there, but it just doesn't open. So what we found is if you get a little bit of boiling water out of the urn, just about that much, stick it in there, leave it to soak for about 10 minutes. I've found they pretty much always open then. So that's top tip for opening the tubes if they won't open. Other than that, I've got pliers and things like that, but that's the easier one. Sometimes you'll find, the thing with watercolours, they quite often just go solid in the tube as well. I don't know why. I don't know if it's like the tops haven't been put back on properly or whether they just dry up anyway. So this one is really solid. There may be a bit of movement in the middle, but there's nothing much going on there. When they're like that, you can just destroy the tube. Watercolours are made out of gum arabic, which is like a water-soluble gum. So all it is it's the same colours, the same pigments that are ground up in acrylics, oil paint, pastels, but they're just stuck together with gum arabic. So it's a water-soluble gum. So in that case, I would probably just tear the thing apart and just put it in a little, put it in something like a little palette. So I'll put a bit there. And you should then be able to just put a bit of water into that, and it might take a little while, but that should then rehydrate. So if you've got tubes that, depends how you feel about it. I just don't like wasting paint, really. It seems a shame. So I tend to, if I can, reuse what I've got. The other thing is if it's dried up in your palette or your pans, if you've got a pan box and it's gone really dry, I tend to just drop a little bit of water on there, particularly if you just leave it maybe overnight to soak in. That'll soften it up a bit, and then you can just get a stiffer brush and get the colour out that way. So that's a little bit on the colours themselves. What else can we talk about? Maybe another week I'll talk about stretching paper. I know you were talking about stretching paper. I think it's if you're working on a watercolour for a prolonged period of time, also if you're working very wet, it's a good idea to stretch it. So it will look like Claire's got there. So you basically got a piece of watercolour paper, we stick it around with gum tape, but I'll perhaps do a demonstration if I get a chance on this time. One of the things I wanted to talk about a little bit this week was creating textures. So we did I've done quite a lot on flat washes, graded washes, wet colour into wet colour, wet colour over dry colour. So that was a little bit last week. And also when we covered watercolours in the last project, which was sometime last year, I very much concentrated on the basic techniques for it. So that might be nice to just look at texture. So I've actually got quite a few different sheets here of different things, like examples that I've created, and depending on what I've got available with me. Obviously you've got the brushwork itself. I did a lot of work in wet, but another way you can put your paint on is this kind of dry brush look. So I've done a little bit here, but you want the paint reasonably thick, and then perhaps using the brush a little bit on its side. And this works better if you've got like a textured paper. paper a little bit of texture. So if you wanted to sort of do something like just a very light touch, perhaps a line of trees, just and so touching the paper. So that can be quite a nice way of creating the texture. And then just perhaps get some wetter paint, do a few trunks and that sort of thing. So that's one technique you could try. Equally, if you're just want to try and you can use it a little bit like that. So it's just softening so then you kind of drag it. It's a mixture of wet and dry, so it's picking up some of the texture of the paper. So it's starting to turn into a painting. Not using any reference to these, it's just playing really. Another way of creating texture is using a bit of sponge. So let's try that. I think you kind of need to dampen it a little bit to start with. And again, a couple of different approaches. You could use it to actually sponge some texture on there, like that. So sort of add some textures in there. The other alternative is to go down a wash. Pop a little wash over here. And then you could vary that a little bit, just kind of lift bits out with the sponge so that it's not completely flat. So again, that might be, let's go a little bit darker with that. Same thing, just darken it down a bit. So I've got a nice watercolour that somebody gave me at home. I was looking at that this morning. I just noticed the trees, it looked like it kind of put some colour down and just lifted a bit out, just like that. And it just creates a little bit of variety. So that's another one. Another one is this idea here, just kind of scratching paint away. So that's a way of creating maybe an impression of foliage. So I'll use that same bit of paint there, and then you could use like a fingernail. There's a couple of ways of doing this. Let's try and use something else. A credit card's quite good with this. I'll just find some find one here. So let's find the credit card. So yeah, you can almost like scratch the paint. If you work hard, you can scratch the paint away like that, so that you're leaving sort of white lines. So you've got to work quite quickly. Probably works better if it's a little bit flatter. The other thing is if you slightly score the paper, almost like scratch into the paper, you could then get like a darker line. You'll find the lines get a bit darker. So that's another approach. I'll use that. What else got here? Masking fluid is something that's worth thinking about. So if you've not come across this before, this is really like a rubber solution, a liquid rubber solution. I find it really wrecks your brushes pretty quickly. So this is an old one that's got glued together masking fluid. What I tend to do with masking fluid is have 2 pots of water. Have one where you're just using the brushes for the masking fluid in. So I'll use this brush. This is just a very cheap, almost like children's brush. I'm not too worried about it. I think it's, I can get quite a few for £1 or something like that. So I find it's best to dampen the brush first, and then it's less likely to dry up on the brush. So just a bit of water, shake that up, and then this, you can kind of use as much or as little as you want of this. So you can put it on quite thickly if you want to get nice big areas, maybe block out a few clouds or something like that. Or, thinner lines, nice thin lines. So it might be just like a little bit of highlight. Maybe you've got a boat or something like that, and there's a highlight on the edge of the boat, something along those lines. So you would use it anywhere where you want to keep the white of the paper. So with watercolours, the brightest white you'll get is the white of the paper, and it comes out a lot whiter than if you're just using white paint. So that's what you do there. You kind of let that dry, and then once it's dry, hopefully you've got one that's here from a little while back. So once you dry, you can then put a wash over the top. And I did have one that I was going to use. I'm not sure yet. No, So basically, yeah, let that dry, pop a wash over the top, let that dry, and then we can take the masking rubber out. So maybe I'll do a little bit of tea break, and then if you want to have a look, you can see how that progresses. So that's masking, with masking fluid. Another way of masking is to use, you could either use something like, what are they called? Pastels, oil pastels. So you could use like a colour, drawing with a colour, or you can use a bit of wax. So this is a bit of candle. So if I wanted to, so you pop some clouds in here. Now, once this is on, this won't come off. So unlike the masking fluid, this will come off and I can paint over the top of that. But this, once this is on, this will stay put. So that'll be the white of the paper. So put a little bit of candle wax on there, and we'll just pop the wash over. Let's go for a slightly bluey colour this time, just for a change. You can see it's gone a little bit bobbly where the wax is, and make that a little bit stronger. Something like that. And I find that the bits that are a little bit bobbly, you can knock that out. Get the brush a little bit clean. I can probably just lift those bits out quite easily, and I'm left with, you know, like an impression of some clouds onto that. I want to lose these little drips here. I can do that while it's away. So that could be quite good. Quite handy if you're out sketching and you just want to pop a few clouds in. Another method would be to put your glue down and then perhaps get some tissue paper and lift it out before it's dry. But I actually think I prefer the wax look itself. I think this drying out can leave you with quite hard edges. This leaves a little bit of texture, which is quite, you know, I find that quite nice. I've got any others? I've got, yeah, there's a whole array. A couple more, sometimes splattering paint can be quite effective. So just sort of flicking it, things like that. Let's move these photos out of the way. These were an example from, particularly that top one there. That was a demo I did in class 2 or 3 years ago. And painted all these darker thin bits, left these white bits here, but then got a little bit of white paint and just sort of splattered a bit to give the impression of the foam in the way. So again, that can be quite a nice technique. So there's a couple of ways of doing that. You can get like a toothbrush, that's the easiest. You're going to get in a bit of a mess with this, and then it's a matter of doing that where you want it. So that can look quite nice. Somebody gave me this, which is designed for the job. So the idea, I think, is that you put your paint on here, and then you turn this round. So it saves getting your fingers all covered. So let's try that. I'm not going to say I've had fantastic results. So we'll go. I'm not quite sure. Nah, I think it's too close. I'm not quite sure where that's splattering. The other thing is, you've got the splatting, but you also got flicking. I'll move this out of the way so I don't correct the photo. Again, if you want something sort of bigger splashes, you could do that sort of thing. So, you know, if you, that can give another, or just, you know, if you wet a paint and have it horizontal. So a few different effects that you'll see some watercolour artists use. I brought a few books in here. To be honest, these are all very traditional. These are kind of the stuff that I like, and it is a lot more traditional. They don't really use any of these techniques very much. But I just want to give you all the range of what's available to you if you'd like to explore. Did anybody leave that this week? Found that?
Did you leave that last week?
Anybody palette? No, that's fine. Might be yours. Yeah, okay, so that's there.
Oh, you don't put your name on it.
Well, there might be fine. Is that anything else you'd like me to cover? I can't think if there's anything.
How about gouache?
Gouache. Yeah, so really gouache is basically a bit more like, or you're using white, or gouache paints, like this one is actually a gouache paint, it would be less transparent. So I think I'll do a little bit on gouache maybe another week, and I'll do it on like a coloured paper, because it can look quite nice on coloured paper. But basically, you're sort of approaching it pretty much like you would oil. And gouache is, yeah, please with that. That's more what I did a lot of when I was younger. I used gouache. It's a bit like good quality poster paint or good quality powder paint.
You can use it for the white.
Yes, you could, yeah. Yeah, you could, yeah. And that's what I did here. This is probably use some sort of gouache white for that, because the gouache white is better quality and more opaque.
Paul, where would you get the colour paper from?
Colour paper, well, I can show you very well. I use my sketchbooks quite a lot. I get these. So if I've got any, let's have a look. If there's any examples in here that would be, I've got one or two.
Has it got to be on watercolour paper?
Well, if it's a sketchbook, not really. That was just something I did in Southwold.
Yeah.
Kind of watercolour sketch. So again, that's really like gouache. I've got some gouache paints, but mostly it's watercolour with a bit of white added. That's really what it means. But if you look at some of Turner's paintings, his watercolours, some of them effectively are watercolours, because he's using blue paper sometimes, and then he's using bits of white mixed in with the watercolour. So I think at that time they didn't necessarily have that distinction, but nowadays they do. They say this is gouache and this is watercolour. But that's a slightly different, you perhaps use watercolour techniques and opaque painting techniques.
But we read about people using salt.
Oh yeah, yeah, you can do that. So I've got some examples here. The slides are kind of different things. So that one is salt. So basically, it works best with something like quite a chunky, crunchy salt, like a sea salt.
Like a coarse one.
Yeah, or dishwasher salt, but sea salt is the one. So basically you put the wash down and then you just drop a bit of salt on. And then what it does is it kind of draws the moisture out of the paint, and you're just left with these little textured marks. This one is cling film, so again, wet wash and stick some cling film on. That's aluminium foil, that was a little bit of bubble wrap. This is mixing gum arabic in with the paint. So somebody in the afternoon class was asking about gum arabic, which is basically what the binder is, what binds the, so that's part of gum arabic. So it's really putting more, it's like adding more glue to the paint, basically. And it just makes it kind of a little bit shinier, perhaps some other textures. So that's actually tons you could, I mean, if you fancy just sort of playing around, it's quite nice to just do a sheet like that. Maybe do a kind of imaginary landscape or an imaginary picture of some sort, rather than worry too much about faithfully copying whatever's in front of you. But it's quite a nice thing to just explore the technique. Is this drying out? That's probably dry enough to put a wash over that. So let's just do that and then we'll put it there. I'll go with yellow just for a change. Okay. So, see that's, I won't go any more than that because that bit's a bit wet still. But you can see that's gone over the top of that. The masking fluids, you can get like a cream colour, and you can also get this blue. And the last bottle I bought was blue, and to be honest, I think the cream ones are probably, I don't think this make is quite as good as the Winsor & Newton. So I'll probably, if I was buying it again, next time when this is gone, I'll get a Winsor & Newton cream one again. The advantage of the blue though is that it's easier to see on the paper, whereas the cream sometimes can blend in. But what we do is let that dry, and then stick a bit more paint on there. After tea, I'll take that off and it just comes to white paper. So there's lots of things. It can be quite a nice thing to play around with. Let's see if that can come out. So, yeah, that's what I'm doing now. So, if you have any struggles, that's I won't get them open. Is that all good? Yeah. Thank you. Right.